Hello and welcome. I am Raj Kumar, the president and editor-in-chief of Devex, and really delighted to be with all of you joining us from all over the world for what is a live event. I'm actually here in New York City. The General Assembly of the United Nations is getting underway, and we here at Devex are covering it. And we're having lots of discussions with leaders and people across the private and public sectors about this year's General Assembly, about all the key issues at stake. And of course, many of those are very familiar to all of us: the climate and the crisis that we're in, the pandemic and all the related health issues around the world, inequality and poverty. There are so many core global development and humanitarian issues at stake. And we're delighted to bring this event to the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in order to raise the profile of an issue that touches on all of those and more, and that is the future of cities. Some 80% of the world's economy comes from cities. Some 80% or so of the world's energy is consumed in cities, and it's about 80% of the world's carbon emissions that come from cities. And a little more than half the world's population lives in cities. So the future of cities, which are growing fast, especially in Africa, especially in Asia, and whether they can be made to be smarter and more sustainable, is really key to the ability of the folks behind me at the UN General Assembly to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and all of the other goals that they've put forward. Cities are really at the center. And they're a key topic, they're a cross-cutting issue, and our partners and colleagues at KPMG have been working on this issue in many different parts of the world for many years and have put together an initiative that is designed to bring the very best practices around sustainability and around technology and innovation to the future of cities. And that's what we're here to talk about today with a group of experts, people who are really working on the forefront of this issue. And I think we're all going to learn quite a bit from it. And I invite those of you who are joining us from around the world in this live session to put in your questions, put in your comments. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We really do want to hear from all of you and make this as interactive as possible. And to get us started, I want to bring someone who can help tell us a bit more about this initiative. It's called the United for Smart and Sustainable Cities Initiative. And we're joined by the Secretary General of that initiative, and the woman who chairs this initiative and chairs their implementation program. That's Kari Aina Ek. She's the Secretary General of United Cities. And she's joining us. And I just want to begin, Kari, by asking you, what is the United for Smart and Sustainable Cities all about? And why is it so important at this moment that we highlight it?
Thank you very much. And it's so nice to be here. Thanks to Devex and KPMG to host this event and co-organizing this with us. It's a big topic to cover in a short time here, but the initiative that I'm chairing in cooperation with 17 UN agencies is to come up with a method where we can actually get an overview of where do we stand in terms of cities, in terms of having key performance indicators that can say something about all dimensions of sustainability: economy, environment, society, and culture, because that's what it is about, right?
And give people just a sense of the scale of this. How many cities are you aiming to reach? How big are these cities?
Yeah, we have quite an ambitious target. We have estimated there is around 10,000 cities, about 50,000 people. If we're going to really make this transition that we all know we need to do this transition, we cannot have a less target than that. So our target is to get these 10,000 cities in this system to try to work together to make this transition happen.
And the idea is you want these cities to really adopt certain key performance indicators that will help them see how they're doing on a path to becoming smart and sustainable. How has the pandemic shifted maybe how you would have designed those indicators, or what lessons have you taken away from this unprecedented moment that maybe changes our thinking about what the future city ought to be like?
I would say that, if we're going back to also the challenges of cities, right? What is really the main challenges? That's maybe shifted a little bit because of the pandemic, but there is like three main challenges. How do you prioritize? How do you know where you stand and where you're going? Like, where is that? If you reverse design from 2030, how do you know how to get there, right? The second is, how do you get the speed up? How can we get compromise time here, because we are probably 100 years off the SDGs, right? We are far off in terms of the time that is what we have. And the third is, how do we finance these initiatives, right? And how do we actually get the direct the money where it needs to go. So these three things, of course, with the pandemic and the even more challenges that these cities has been, put through the last 2 years, it's of course getting even more complex, right? But I think the method is the same, right? You need a method, a holistic method that is also the same. I always say cities are more similar than they are different, right? And there is so many lessons to learn between the cities, but we are not good in that, to really bring this all together. So we need a direction that everybody is going in that same direction.
And what do you say? I mean, thinking about the pandemic, right? So many of the cities that were really affected are those that lack the infrastructure. So, the health agencies say, wash your hands with soap and water. And so many people don't have that basic infrastructure in their home to do it. Or stay home, but so many people have to leave because they don't have electricity, refrigeration, they need to get food, or they need to work. The kind of core basic sanitation and electricity, the basic infrastructure of a city. What do you say, or what does your initiative say to those cities that are grappling with that right now today, even as they see massive migration flowing into the city? How do they get a handle on that? And as you say, prioritize what to do from here?
Yeah, I mean, how we've been seeing this, I mean, it's three main challenges, but it's also really three ways to do this. I mean, how do we really, get this speed up in this? And what we've said is that we need to see, where we stand in terms of all these different aspects of that. And health, of course, and health infrastructure is one of the core elements of this, right? It's also one of our biggest challenges in a lot of developing country cities. How do we get speed into health infrastructure? So we need this common ground and understanding in a local context where we stand. And that's one of the issues, clearly, but also a lot of the other ones, as you said, energy, water, some of these really key challenges that we're faced with in the next years. And what we are doing and saying the only way we can get this time up, quickening this understanding, the common understanding of this, is to use technology. It's to use digital twins of these cities, because maybe we don't need to build another road, or maybe we don't need to build another hospital. Maybe there's other ways that we can leverage on the resources we have, but to plan it differently. So we are using digital twins to speed this up. And you will hear that also in the debate today, how we're working together with partners to do that. And the third is that we need to de-risk the capital, right? To get into finance, especially also health infrastructure, right? Which is very complex to get finance now in a lot of cities.
Tell us a bit more about this idea of digital twins. What exactly does that mean? Are you're pairing up cities with each other digitally, or how does it work?
Yeah, this is very interesting, actually, because it's in our context. I mean, we've been working on the city projects for the last 10 years. But what happened was that we tapped into technology that's been used in the offshore industry in Norway. So this has been digital twinning of the ocean. Everything around the ocean has been put into digital twins here, and the technologies for the last 20 years has been developed here in Norway. For 2.5 years ago, we approached those same institutions to say, can we use this technology for planning cities? Can we make a digital twin of the cities? And then with all this data, putting all this data in that we have, but we're not using, and then start to plan the cities differently. So that's what we did. And it's not just having a visual twin, yeah. It's really also like the
simulation.
It's a simulation. Sort of
and a model that lets you then see, if we change this factor or that factor, what would the impacts actually be on the population or on the indicators that you're tracking?
Yeah, absolutely. Or how do we, get just the carbon? What does it really mean to get net zero? And how do we get to net zero in a city? Take a city case, right, and see which parameters you need to shift to get to net zero. And you can think about it as a one room schoolhouse, right, where you put all these people into that digital twin, and you have the same understanding of why we need this and how do we get there, because that's been missing, right? We all know we need to do it, but how to get there and get a common ground that we need to shift this or that parameter, so we need to shift the money here or there. That's what's been missing. And these digital twin and these domes are perfect. Everybody in here see what's really going on.
And in the panel that's coming, we have a mayor. I'm eager to hear his take on this. I'm sure I can imagine mayors listening to this discussion saying, I want that. I want to be able to simulate my city, have a complete comprehensive model. Where do you stand in the initiative of rolling these simulated cities, these twins out? How many cities have you reached, and what's kind of the implementation plan from here? How will this initiative grow?
Yeah, I mean, we have now approximately also 200 cities that's done the KPIs, the UN KPIs, and big cities like Dubai and Singapore, Cairo, Moscow, they have done this evaluation already on the U4CC KPIs. Now we're rolling out more the digital twins, and we are very short of having a full digital twin of whole Norway. We have 90 cities and communities in Norway now, and most of them have also now digital twins. So we're starting almost to get the country now with a digital twin, and then it gets really interesting because the connections here and interlinkages between the cities and the regions, that's really interesting. But Mayor Bernard that is here, he's very advanced in digital twin, and it's some of the things that he's been using, so I'm sure he can share more about that. But and now we are having digital twin of several European cities, and the next is now also to bring in other global cities having these digital twins. So that's what we are in the midst of now. Yeah.
Now it's still fairly early, but have you been able to back test it and sort of see that the simulations held up once you do interventions in the real world? Does it look like the models really work?
Absolutely, and we are astonished how the cities, because we are just facilitating, giving everybody the tool. You can even use the tool on a laptop. You don't need a huge building or to really use this technology. And we're giving this now to cities to start to test this out, and they are coming up with usages of using this tool for, you cannot imagine all the different areas. And what is also very interesting now is also we're using the digital twin for having in terms of the capital. So you can actually show, and with using this technology, de-risking also in terms of putting money into these projects, right? Because you have really the facts here on the table, right?
Yeah, you were mentioning that's the third big challenge is all this capital. I mean, capital is not really a problem. There's so much liquidity in the world. The problem is getting it where the world actually needs it. And exactly. As you say, de-risking, I can imagine that sitting with investors and being able to show them with some reliability what the results of an infrastructure investment in a city might actually be. We have very little time left before we're going to bring in the panel. I just want to get a quick sense from you. When people hear about the future of cities, they might be envisioning something from a science fiction film. What should they be envisioning as you simulate these cities, as you create a digital twin, as you try to plan for the city of the future? What is it really, the city of the future? What does a smart and sustainable city look like in your mind?
I'm just thinking that in 2030, because it's only 9 years from now, we will need to sit in an environment that we can look our children in the eyes and say, we did what we need to do in these 9 years, right? To have a sustainable, future for our children. So I think, the optimal way is that we have secured that we have become net zero, right? We have achieved the SDGs or far, at this level, and we've created, I think, a very different environment and economy specifically, how we direct resources, how we interact with each other, right? I don't think it's, I'm a born optimist, of course, but I think it's absolutely possible if we join forces as we are doing now, because there is so many willing cities. Cities are waiting for getting involved, right? And getting the grip on what they need to do. And the same with the private sector, which is just lining up. And now we are, 99% of the time we are sitting with investors now and different banks and funds to bring this full circle together. So it's not, we're not in lack of, the seeing the possibility here for everybody to create this marketplace, which is really the biggest, right? Net zero marketplace is really where we need to go now. And those who are moving first will also have the biggest benefits to be part of this.
Just briefly, because I think this event will help to increase that interest, and people might be following along in municipalities or local governments around the world and saying, ooh, how do I get involved in this? How do they? What is the process for the many cities around the world that want to be part of this?
This is the open door, and as I said, we are developing, or we have different hubs now. So in North America, we have in Singapore, and we have in different countries hubs. It's very easy to find us, and we have an open door for any city, municipalities, or region who would like to join the initiative. So we welcome everyone.
Well, I have to say a big thank you to Kari Eineck for getting us started in this discussion. You've piqued my interest, certainly, and I'm sure those who are listening about this initiative and how important it can be for the world. And so I'm excited to thank you and to welcome the panel to join us now on this virtual stage. Please join me in welcoming those of you who are around the world following along. Stine Lise Hattestad Bratsberg, who is the partner and head of KPMG Sustainability in Norway. We have Samer Waba, who is the global director of the World Bank's Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Land Global Practice. We have Mayor Bernard Faustino D, who is the mayor of Calayan City in the Philippines, and Klaus Heidinger, who is the Sustainable City Solutions lead at Siemens Advanta. So welcome to all of you. Each of you brings tremendous expertise to this discussion. And what I love about the way Carrie got us started is this is a very action-oriented session. You know, we want to hear about what's actually moving forward. So the concept here of a sustainable city is not that new. And there may be people listening to this who say, we've been having this discussion, you know, for many years. So what is different about the moment that we're in now? Maybe this moment as the pandemic is still very much with us, but we're thinking about building back better. What's different today? Why should we be paying more attention? Why should the delegates behind me at the UN be paying more attention now to this initiative? Maybe Stine, I can start with you.
Yes, I think thank you so much for inviting us here. And I have to say thank you to Kari as well, because KPMG, as you said, are partnering up with United Cities, but we'll come back to that a little bit later. But why it is so pressing right now, I think it's because what we're saying is that people are moving into the cities. People need to find a way of working, affordable housing, mobility, and everything in cities that's already in a challenging position. So it's the timing. We need to act now. The UN General Secretary, he said we were on Friday, I think he said 2.7 degree plus in 2030, the way we're working like right now. And he was really challenging the developed countries on taking, how do you say, even a more active role. And since we were talking about the finance, that's where he actually put the needle as well. But I think we need, as Kari said, to think differently. What we have done until now is to think, how can we reduce emission? How can we have as little unemployment as possible? And how can we just minimize everything? But what we need to do is to turn around our head and say, no emission. We need to look at how can we make the positive sides, the positive developing of a city that is already there. And I'll hopefully get back to some examples later, but it's like, think about all the spaces that are owned by the public that is used from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock. It's buildings there, standing there 24 hours. They don't move, but do we use them? No. So we just need to start to think differently. And in KPMG,
I want to bring some.
Sorry.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm interested in that example. I want to come back to it, but I want to bring some into the discussion if I can. You lead the urban practice at the World Bank. So you're thinking about it, you know, the large scale portfolio, I think $30 billion portfolio investing in cities. You're right now joining us from Cairo, which is a city that maybe exemplifies many of the same challenges and opportunities we just heard of. How does this discussion of the future city resonate with you? Where does it kind of connect with the reality of a city like Cairo?
Thank you, Raj, and great to join this panel. I think you've summarized very well early on the key challenges facing cities, you know, the speed and scale of urbanization. We're talking about cities accommodating 2.5 billion new urban inhabitants by 2050. That's about the population of Turkey each year between now and 2050. It's 85 million on average. You've spoken about, you know, the energy consumption, the emissions. All these are very valid points. Add to them the 1 billion people who live in slums and informal settlements without secure tenure, without decent housing conditions. Add to them, you know, the 2 billion workers in the informal sector who, as you said, you know, have their livelihoods affected. So I think when you start adding up all these factors and then start shedding light at what COVID revealed, because what COVID revealed at the end of the day was those inequities that existed within cities. You know, it has clearly shown that it's not about density, you know, because some of the denser and larger cities, whether they're like Singapore or Seoul, have fared much better than smaller places in terms of the spread, you know, combating the spread of the pandemic.
Right. There was a sense that if people are packed together, that's going to be the reason for massive spread. But those cities showed you could mitigate it if you had the right policies and the right infrastructure.
Exactly. So it's not about density as a number of people per unit of land area, but how that density is managed. It's how density is livable versus overcrowding has become the challenge. So I think you had, you know, very important notions on sustainability beforehand, and they got further if you will, enlightened by the pandemic on the importance of ensuring that the city of the future, is both inclusive and livable. And in this regard, it will become a more sustainable city. By inclusive, I mean it's a city where people who have poor housing conditions, poor tenure security, poor access to infrastructure, water and sanitation, public spaces are not worse off affected by disaster risk, affected by floods, by pandemics, etc. So ensuring that there is inclusive policies within cities, but at the same time ensuring that cities are livable. Because the city, as we've traditionally known it, which is city being a place of job opportunities, of economic opportunities, will continue being. But at the end of the day, now we're going through a period of transition where there'll be hybrid work, where people will no longer need to be, living as close as possible to where their jobs are. And this, the choice of housing will involve, issues related to, for instance, the amenities, the livability within a city. But also, you'll always have key workers in a city, the essential workers, the nurses, the police, the garbage collection professionals, and so on and so forth, whom will need affordable housing to live in a city. So you'll need to have those two dimensions of inclusion and livability to be able to contribute to that sustainable city of the future.
Maybe we can bring in our mayor on the panel, Bernard. I'd just like to get your take on this exact issue, because you have to deal with these current challenges while you think about what the future of your city would be. How does this conversation resonate with you? What do you think of when you think of the future of your city?
Well, thanks a lot, Raj, and of course Devex and KPMG for having us as a guest and sharing our humble experience in Kawayan City. Kawayan City is it's just like 80% of the cities around the world. It's not New York, it's not Cairo, it's not London. 80% of the cities in the world are just like Kawayan. They're small, they're medium size, not so much income, but what we did in partnership with United Cities is the KPMIs that Carrie was talking about, of having to assess the Sustainable Development Goals. Our plans and programs anchored on the SDGs have really set a tone, sort of a blueprint on how we should see things or cities in the future. Definitely technology is here to stay. We have to take full advantage of technology, but of course, looking after the present needs of the present generation as well as the future generations. I think that would be the city of the future, making sure that everything is inclusive, making sure that it's sustainable, and making sure the needs of the future generations are met.
Bernard, I'm just looking at your bio and the fact that you've been named twice most outstanding mayor. You've had a number of awards around science and technology and innovation. I wonder, is this approach using KPIs, is it something you think is translatable to many other cities, or is there going to be a small leading edge of cities run by mayors who are more tech savvy or innovative that can get there? Does this apply to everyone?
Yes, certainly. One of the things that we've been trying to do is trying to tell everyone that if a city like Kawayan, which is highly agricultural, very poor in terms of income, a third-class city can do it, there's no other reason for other local government or cities around the world not to do it. The KPIs have really guided us. We've been espousing and really advocating for the SDGs since 2016. But with the help of the KPIs through the United Cities, we now have a more clear picture. It's really like a blueprint of what things we should learn from and what things we should improve on. So I think this is something that United Cities have really play a major role in really making sure that all the cities across the globe are aware of the KPIs.
Maybe Klaus, we could bring you into the discussion. You lead the sustainable cities work at Siemens, a huge global company, a very tech and innovation oriented company. And I wonder how the pandemic has shifted your approach when you're talking to mayors or municipalities and helping them to plan the future of their city. Do you feel like there's a before and after this global pandemic, or is this just a minor blip in what was a trajectory you were already working toward? How do you see the moment we're in when it comes to cities? And I think you may be muted. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. First of all, thank you very much for the invite. Well, probably I have to answer with the pandemic, we had some improvements with regards to air quality in cities, due to lockdowns, things like that. But probably it will come back also post-corona. What never changed was the pressure on the carbon emission. We have more than 500 city mayors who declared a state of climate emergency, just saying we will not meet our sustainability targets. And it's also from our work and my job, I'm supporting cities in how to become sustainable, how to meet their targets. And it's a huge contradiction as more and more people moving from rural areas into cities, so they expect to have jobs there. The cities have to provide houses, buildings, energy, transport. So basically their carbon emissions going up. And on the same time, they feel committed, looking to the Paris agreements, to reduce by 30, 50%. And that's the biggest contradiction. And that's not easy to manage. I mean,
it makes me think of Stina's point about the unused buildings, the government buildings, right? You have to somehow find a way to take the assets you already have, I guess. I mean, give me an example of what are some of the solutions you present to cities, Klaus, when it comes to trying to bridge this gap?
Well, we help the cities in a way, and this is basically my task. We have developed a kind of simulation methodology, which is called City Performance Tool, where we can simulate the impact of infrastructure. And it's basically more than 70 infrastructure technology from transport, building, and energy, and onto the environment, KPIs such carbon emission, air quality. But we can also prove how many jobs will be created and how much CapEx, OpEx is required. So we're helping a lot of cities to derive this kind of roadmap. But if you ask me what is the biggest challenge, I mean, everyone is going towards three mainstreams. The one is the electromobility, the other one is building retrofit, and the other one is renewables. And they are dependent on each other. So, I mean, if you have electromobility and you charge your e-cars from a power plant which burns coals, it will not be very sustainable. So, and then the question is, if you want to do that, you need this money, and then you only have this budget, and budgets getting more and more restricted. So that's where we're helping to find what is the best way to put, let's say, investment in which infrastructure.
Yeah, I guess maybe Sameh, I can ask you, is it working quickly? I just want to ask you quickly, is it working? When you at the World Bank are looking to make an investment, maybe you're looking to bring in private capital as well and other investors. Does looking at a visualization or a simulation, a broader model, does it attract more capital? Are you able to de-risk?
I'm glad you raised that question, Raj, which is at the heart of it. To what extent is technology, if you will, the centerpiece of a smart city strategy? I have to admit, personally, I cringe when I hear the term smart city because, it assumes that, especially if your definition of a smart city is that it hinges around access to and use of technology, it assumes that the cities that cannot afford this technology, that have much more, if you will, basic challenges to resolve are not smart, which I don't know if translates into being dumb or what. So I personally do cringe a lot around, because there's a lot of push around technology without, really prioritizing the fact that what really matters is management and governance. So at the end of the day, when we're talking KPI, we're talking about key performance indicators, which are, metrics by which a city is managed. It describes targets to the planning process. It describes a way by which, a plan has to be, put in place, a way of working across sectors, across institutions, because most of the challenges that we face are not necessarily, technology. They are about the fact that there's lots of institutional divisions within city. There's lots of sectoral planning where, the folks who are in charge of the housing investments are not talking to the folks in charge of the water and sanitation or the transport investments. So how do you get them to work across sectors in an integrated form? You're talking about how various municipalities that are adjoining do not easily come to a metropolitan planning and management solution. They'll each want to provide their own infrastructure. So there's lots of governance and institutional challenges that require to be resolved for them to be, if you will, a better utilization of technology. Of course, technology can avail to you information that you might not have. You can fly a drone, you can crowdsource information from people to be able to constitute a flood map, and we use it. But at the end of the day, the heart of it will need to be governance and management. Going to your point on financing, at the end of the day, the ability to attract a private sector for investment, whether in infrastructure or, to provide a sort of lending, to a city on city credit worthiness, requires at the heart of it to have a regulatory framework for public-private partnerships, to have the ability to enforce contracts. And there's a lot of, if you will, underpinning for you to be able to bring about a private investor to be there. And in the absence of this, then you will have to come up with the de-risking, with the guarantees, with the credit enhancement, so that you can reduce the risk and bring the private sector. For as long as you're not transforming a bad project into a good project with credit enhancement, you don't give a guarantee for the private sector to come and finance a bad project that they wouldn't finance otherwise. You come to bring it so that you can mitigate against aspects of, information asymmetry, risk, and in lack of comprehension of risk or a lack of track record, but you don't transform a bad project into a good project. So back to you.
Yeah, there's so much there that we're going to dig into. Those fascinating comments, but I know Sina wants to jump in. Let's hear from you, and then we have a number of interesting questions that have come in too from our audience.
Yes, it's just about technology, and as Sama says, it's technology. It's just the enabler. The humans are really the transformers, and we need to remember that. But I think why United Cities have started to cooperate, why KPMG have started to cooperate with United Cities is because they actually need manpower. They need people on the ground, and KPMG are about 200,000, more than 200 people living all over the world who have already done a whole lot of good projects with combining technology as an enabler. And we need to start to share more. And what we hopefully can do is that instead of just prioritizing after what we guess are the most pressing issues, we think the KPIs are, and to figure out the gaps, where are the most pressing gaps that we actually can use some of what we already have developed somewhere in the world and transform it to another place in the world. And as you say, Sana, I think the really interesting thing that we have done a little bit right now is that we bring different actors to the table. So it is public, private, investors, finance, and academia. And also the politicians, because the politicians need to think that this is really interesting to go into because they have to be popular, So we need to push the governance and the more structural changes while actually lifting the knowledge and then start to work where the issues are most pressing.
Let's stay on this theme because it's a really interesting one. And we even had a question that came in along these lines. Sama is making the point that basically this is a management problem, that fundamentally, that if we talk about it in the terms of smart cities, it might obscure from the core issue, which is we have a management problem. If you have a good project that makes sense, maybe people need access to clean water and we have a project to do that, but we're dealing with perhaps procurement challenges. We don't have contract enforceability, a number of other management issues. Maybe the different agencies in the municipality aren't coordinating together, that's the fundamental issue. Given how big of a deal this point is, I just wonder from Bernard and Klaus and anyone who wants to jump in, do we agree? Is this fundamentally a management problem that is leading to the lack of investment in good projects in cities? Maybe Bernard, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I probably would say yes, because that also gives us now the importance of doing the KPIs. As I said earlier, it becomes a blueprint. Part of it is really collaborative, a collaborative government or collaborative approach. Each department is working on silos back in the day, but having these kinds of KPIs, having these new set of rules would really entail everybody to work together, collaborate together, and thus, getting rid of that silo mentality. So I think moving forward, this definitely would have a great impact in the lives of whether it be the local government or the private citizens or even the private sector in a way.
We had a question that came in, Klaus, from a Brazilian urban planner who's now based in Switzerland named Aline Lusso, asking really whether the technology being used that Kari talked about, that we've heard a bit, this digital twinning, can it really be used to support the prioritization and decision making that we're talking about right now, this kind of management challenge in urban and regional planning? Are you seeing it being used to actually make better decisions about where to prioritize investments?
Well, from the 40 cities we have supported so far, cities like Buenos Aires, San Francisco, China, many cities in China and Europe, they basically used exactly this methodology to prioritize, to see if you would know that this and this technology brings this impact on carbon emission, air quality, also on the economics at the end, and you would know with $1 spent in a technology, what will be the biggest lever, which of the technology will bring the best impact, then you have a kind of, and especially for urban planners, they have a long, let's say, a roadmap. And I mean, we talk about technology, and I'm absolutely aware it's not just technology. There are many other factors like social economics and so on. But we understand technology, so that's why we focus on technology. You would have, let's say, a roadmap over the next year, which of the infrastructure technology you would like to get in place, which also enables the urban planners to initiate a discussion for the politician level. Because usually urban planners do have 20 kilograms of planning papers for the next 2 years, but there is no, let's say, and I talk to many urban planners, there is no committed strategy over the next 10 years. For instance, are we willing to implement congestion charging, which would be the best if you want to reduce carbon air quality, want to improve air quality, things like that. So that's always very much dependent. Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying it can even be an enabler for addressing the political challenges, because in the end, cities are political units. There's a government. They have to, as Stina described, they have to win support from their constituents. And I guess you're suggesting if you can use these simulations and models to really show what's likely to happen, you can reduce the risk for elected officials in making decisions about what they want to do.
First of all, I agree. And secondly, what we heard also from Bernard is silo thinking, that the transportation will not share data with the utilities and things like that. This can be solved interdisciplinary from the urban planners, because they have to come up with a holistic view and holistic planning.
Bernard, please jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a concrete example of how we use the digital twin in my city. We're typhoon belt. We're in the Philippines. We get hit by 20 typhoons every year, about 7 to 10 major typhoons. And every year we try to assess the damage. And sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes even months to assess the damage, whether it be crops, damage to property, damage to houses. But with the help of digital twin, in a click of a finger, in a click of a laptop, we already instantly can see the cost of the damage, which houses are fully damaged, which houses are partially damaged, which roads needs to be repaired, how much it will cost, and therefore in an instant we get an accurate assessment, and therefore we have a better decision on channeling our resources more efficiently and effectively. I think this is a game changer in the way of the future. Not having a digital twin before was like really going blind in assessing damages every time there's a calamity, and we do it every year. So with this, I think it has really changed our way of dealing with calamity.
I see Sameh wants to get in, and Stina, and we've got lots of great questions coming in from the audience, but go ahead, Sameh, you begin.
Very quickly, in terms of approaches to solve the management challenge, since we've spoken about technology, let me throw in another one out there, which is basically incentives, aligning the incentives so that you can get to the right behaviors that you want. So one of the programs that we structure a system of intergovernmental fiscal transfers within a given country. So, it's basically the flows of funds that go from national government to provincial governments to local governments. And we usually structure them in 2 tranches. One tranche becomes, if you will, an objective formula that's on a population headcount, on a depth and severity of poverty. You choose, if you will, the indicators to allocate a portion of the funds for each of the localities. But then the other part becomes a performance grant. And that is linked to specific KPIs that are established either nationally or in conjunction with the municipality. So for instance, if government wants to incentivize local governments to boost their municipal finances, it can establish a minimum threshold, let's say 10% increase in municipal finances year on year. And those municipalities or local governments that exceed that get an additional performance grant. If the point is to have, an inclusionary policy, maybe a participatory plan, like Klaus was talking, etc., you put in place these metrics and you reward that performance with these financial incentives. So I think by doing that, you also help overcome quite a bit of the political economy challenges. Because at the end of the day, like Stina said, technology is an enabler. It's not going to start getting itself implemented in the absence of the right institutional and governance framework within a given place. So being able to structure incentives becomes a great complement to helping achieve the types of targets and KPIs that you want to have. Thanks.
So we're hearing about the management challenge, the incentives that could be applied to address them, and that these are addressing real political and social issues. A number of questions have come in that tie to that around the affordable housing challenge. So I want to get to that in a moment, but Stina, maybe I just want to hear your follow-up comments on this before we shift gears.
No, I'm fine, but I can jump on the real estate issues that I see quite a few people are talking about, and affordable housing.
And maybe I
so
can
on.
just maybe I can just help frame that up. I mean, essentially, we had one comment that said 1 billion people are in need of housing now. We're building the equivalent of a New York City per month globally for the next 4 years just to keep up with demand. Others are saying we're talking about inclusive cities, kind of welcoming and helping people in the cities, but at the same time, there's a crisis in affordability of housing. What are we doing to address it? Are we kind of missing the boat here as we talk about sustainability and smart when there's this affordability challenge staring us in the face? Stina.
Yes, I think it's back to where I started to say that we need to think different from the start. And I think Klaus is also talking a lot about that. You need to think different from the start. And giving you an example, it's in very many cities all over the world, it's a lot of industry within the cities, and a lot of industry that's not longer industry, but maybe still the area is closed for public people. So what we have experienced in some cases is that you open up the arena, it's bought by, real estate people, but they go in partnership with the public and they see what can we do when we open up this, when we rebuild it in another way, and actually instead of working in silos, working together and see how can we actually get some public spaces that can be for everybody, not only the one that's going to live in this arena, and then also builds, of course, plus houses that is not only giving emission, but actually gaining more electricity than
somehow a carbon sink and renewing energy through solar
and other technologies. But the case here is that if not the private money for real estate work with the public money, this won't happen. You see, because we need to then, for instance, put a library there, put a health service office, put something that's really needed for the people that are living around this industry area that will build buildings instead. And then it comes to the question about affordable. So how can we build different? Even some places they're testing out sharing living houses, apartments. So a lot of things happening just to see how can we change this. And just the final thing about this is when you open up an industry area, you also use already used nature that is in the middle of a city.
Right, so it sounds like you're looking at the public sector's major asset being land that they have that they're underutilizing today, or buildings that they have that they're underutilizing.
Yes, but when they sell it or when the private actors comes in, they need to cooperate. They need to find solutions for the future on this area, instead of just building high exclusive buildings or just building public buildings. Need to do things in another way. And it is happening.
And it is happening. That's exciting to hear. And I wonder if others want to chime in on this question because it's such a big one and it sparked so much interest in our audience around affordability. I mean, we all know, many cities. I know, Bernard, you're in the Metro Manila area. It's a big, sprawling city. And the way it has grown often is by growing out. Some had talked about density, growing up or packing more people into less space. What is the solution here as we go from a little more than half the world to something like 68% that is going to be in cities in the next decade or so? I mean, so there's massive growth in cities. What do we actually do to address this? Anybody want to chime in? Same, go ahead.
Thanks, Raj. So I think the housing affordability problem is basically a lens into saying the housing market is not working. And as you rightly said, underlying the housing market is a challenge in the land market itself. Because one of the most fundamental reasons for housing costs to be high is that access to land is complicated. Usually it means that property rights, in terms of who owns what, is not known. And it usually means that, there's a challenge as far as infrastructure is concerned, a challenge as far as the ability of developers to provide housing, and then the demand side challenges, meaning access to finance, mortgage markets, etc., are not well developed. So if you really want to solve that challenge, you really need to have an integrated approach. You need to both tackle the demand side challenges and the supply side challenges. So you need to figure out, solutions to the land problem, property rights to bring developers down market, and you need to boost, if you will, people's affordability by enabling them to access housing finance, microfinance, etc. And then government needs to intervene with smart subsidies to plug the gap for the poorest who need that little, if you will, plug so that they can enter into home ownership. And you can't do that, in a haphazard fashion is one thing. And at the same time, you can't just focus on new housing construction thinking, I want to provide new housing units when, let's say, 90% of the housing problem is a stock problem, meaning poor people living in slums and informal settlements. So you need to start thinking also about improving living conditions in slums and informal settlements, including the security of tenure of people, so that they can improve their housing on their own. Because what's preventing them is not a lack of affordability, it's the lack of a title, or, if you will, that government is not going to evict them at any time. The moment you start doing that, you're unleashing, if you will, lots of private investment, including consolidation, improvement, and the opening up of a lot of housing units. Cairo, the city that I'm talking to you from today, has an upward of a 25% vacancy rate over here, because the supply has catered to, if you will, upper income groups, and there's an oversupply in that segment, and then lower income groups are catered to informally, and then you had issues related to former rent controls, etc., that locked a lot of units out of the market. So you have to look at the market in a comprehensive way, because number of units there are, but mismatch between, if you will, the two ends of the market, there's a major mismatch.
I mean, it sounds to me, I want to hear the mayor's take on this, but that the digital twin, the idea of using a simulation, could be pretty powerful here, because if it is a market design problem, you want to be able to see, if I tweak my rent control law or I add some new housing stock in this area, what will the actual after effects be on traffic, on the need for health systems, on where students will be and where schools need to be located, right? But Mayor, what's your take on this broad issue of housing affordability?
Right. I think this issue is very complex. Take, for example, the Philippines. We're a third world country, but we're one of the highest cost of living in Asia. So, and 90%, there's a lot of homeless people here, but then again, the cost of living is so high. So that really boils down to the question: where do we put these housing units? Who do we give it to? Who do we give it to? And I think one of the main solutions here is encapsulated in the new urban agenda, is to build resettlement housing that the people won't anymore need to go to the cities, or develop more cities, develop urban areas, and slowly decongest the cities. That's the only way, because everybody's going into the cities, but the businesses, the schools, or the institutions should go out of the cities as well. To have that balance. I think this is a very complex, and I think with the new urban agenda, with all the sustainable KPIs that are there for housing, I think all of these will be addressed. Definitely, the digital twin will be a powerful tool in really identifying which areas you should put the housing units in.
Klaus, I wonder if you have a take on this, and then I've got a question I want to direct to you as well. So briefly, what's your take on this issue?
Well, what I saw on the affordable housing is that there is a correlation between rental prices and stock owned by government. saying that, for instance, I live in a city in Vienna, costs of living or the rental prices are compared with other cities rather low. And the reason is that the social, what we say social living, that is owned by the government, is not was not given to the private sector. So other cities, for instance, Singapore, they also regulate the private sector, the market, the stock market, that if the price is going up, they put more social housing in place so that the price go down. So there is, I mean, that's what I saw. There's a correlation between whether the government owns the social housing or not. If you put everything into the private sector, of course, prices will automatically going up.
Well, let me direct a question to you that we got from Reina Santos. So Klaus, she asked, what is your definition of pandemic-proof smart cities? And we already talked about this concept of a smart city, but is there something about the future smart city in your model, as you bring technology to these places, that would make it pandemic-proof, or at least maybe more pandemic-resistant?
I mean, honestly, I can give you a definition, what is a smart city? And for me, a smart city is a city who is able to manage the balance of a triangle, which is quality of life, economicness, and sustainability. So if you are able to manage those 3 points in the triangle, you would call yourself a smart city. What is pandemic proof? I mean, that's a tricky question. So, I mean, we all running first time through a pandemic. We all have our lessons learned. Some probably did react like this, the others this. Is there a common solution? We don't know. So it's honestly, I don't feel comfortable to answer this question. Yeah.
Well, and it may be just about the basics, right? That people need basic sanitation, running water, electricity, access to the internet. I mean, the sort of the basics it may not be a very high-end technology, or perhaps it's just the basic technologies that people need.
Probably.
Yeah. Well, as we're coming toward the end of our time, I guess I wanted to come back to you, Stina, and just hear a little bit more about these KPIs specifically. And what do cities that want to be part of this initiative, who say, to Same's earlier point, I don't want to be a dumb city, I want to be a smart city, or I want to, be on the edge of this, but I have a lot of real urgent, immediate challenges to address. How did they take these KPIs, join this initiative, and actually start to move forward? What is your advice to them?
I think every city all over the world, or municipality, large, big, whatever, they can do this U4 SSC assessment and get to know where they, with the KPIs that are already addressed there, that is actually taking into account everything that has to do with nature and environment. It has to do with the people and the society, and also the economic questions at the same time. But I think the KPIs, they don't solve anything. The KPIs just give you the facts. They give you the numbers. They manage to put and address where do we have a gap. And this gap needs to be the one that we prioritize, because these are the most pressing gaps that this city needs to look into. And it's easy when it's based on facts, to where we in KPMG comes in many ways, to try and network, put together people from the government, politicians, that we said, innovation, small startups, whatever, big companies, and everybody that needs to act together and look at how do we solve these issues in another way. And since Sana is on that represent all this financial part of the solution, it's definitely, it won't be fixed unless we bring down the silo thinking and start to think different in networking, and also have the finance on place. And of course, we were talking about government management. It's definitely going to be in the core of the solutions. So what we are hoping to do is that we can contribute both to innovation that helps solve the issues, but it's just as much innovation regarding to system thinking and governance, and how you actually break down silos and manage to find solutions. So we're in the starting phase. And sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, we've just about run out of time, but I'd love to hear a very brief final thought from each of you. Maybe Same, I can start with you and we'll end with the mayor. Go ahead.
So in terms of the sequencing, the way we approach it is planning, connecting, and financing. And the key part is to start with the planning process, with building consensus amongst the different stakeholders, involving citizens, bringing together, if you will, public and private institutions to work on a planning vision, then figuring out the connectivity, whether it's digital connectivity, infrastructure connectivity, like you said, Raj, basic access to water and sanitation, trash collection. If you don't have these, it's very hard to get past that towards any dimension of competitiveness. Thinking about resilience, which is something that's particularly key because, if cities do not have emergency preparedness and response capacity, they won't be able to deal with pandemics, nor will they be able to deal with a cyclone or with an earthquake. And then when you have those foundations in place, then it's about the finance. Because financing is meant to serve a proper planning process where the prioritization has happened rather than the other way around. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very helpful. And it connects so well to what Carrie said right at the beginning about getting those priorities first. Klaus, any final thoughts very briefly?
Well, as we probably know, cities are the one who have to solve the carbon emission topics because most people living in cities are the one solving the air quality, the pandemic. So there's, let's say, if I would be a mayor, there's a huge pressure on me. I have to solve everything. So that's why it's important to have conferences like this, people from various divisions think about what can be done and what is required.
So Klaus said it well, Mr. Mayor. Bernard, you are in the hot seat there, trying to think about the future of your city and deal with the immediate challenges today, like typhoons. What do you think? Any very final closing thoughts from you?
Well, again, thank you very much, Raj. Well, I think there's really a great importance of really informing and making local government units all over the world aware of these KPIs, aware of what we are doing, what U4SC is doing, what the United Cities is doing. I think that's very important. And thank you for this wonderful webinars or sidelines like this that, it can really show the world. I mean, a lot of local governments are already doing a good job, but the KPIs are there to guide them. It's not going to solve their problems, but it's a guide. It's a guide. It's a blueprint. It's a guide, and it's there for them to use. And if we're able to transform cities all over the globe to be a smart and sustainable city, then I think our future generations will be thanking us. At least we did something in our generation. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all of our panelists and those of you who are joining us around. I know are virtually applauding this group for a really fascinating set of comments. I know I learned a lot, so please join me in thanking Stina Lise Hattesbag Bratsberg, Same Waba, Bernard Faustino D, and Klaus Heidinger. Thank you for a really interesting discussion, and a big thanks to all of you who are following this conversation live for the great questions and comments. Really helped to make the conversation that much richer. And I can say for my part here at the UN General Assembly, so many of the big issues that are being tackled today kind of make you feel like we're stuck as a planet. We're behind on the climate goals. We're behind on the sustainable development goals. And the lens that our partners at KPMG are bringing to this around cities, I think is so critical because it gives us a new platform, a new cross-cutting theme to look at that gives us a way to connect to some of those big problems and maybe see a potential for a solution. So I applaud our colleagues who've got this initiative going. And I know that those who are interested in learning more will find information associated with this video on it. Thank you to KPMG. Thank you to all of our panelists. And thank you finally to all of you. I'm Raj Kumar here with Devex in New York. Thanks for continuing to follow our coverage of the 76th UN General Assembly. All right, we're off.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Are you happy?